Fighting game spin-offs seem like an inevitability for every successful franchise. It's happened to everyone from Final Fantasy to Sonic, Persona, Castlevania, freaking Onimusha, and we're only seeing more crossover fighters as the years go by. But what about when it happens the other way around? Fighting games releasing spin-offs that aren't fighting games isn't uncommon either. I just think we hear about those a lot less. Games like Dead or Alive Extreme and Puzzle Fighter are pretty well-known spin-offs from their series, but how many people know Death by Degrees, a game starring Nina from Tekken, or Soul Calibur Legends for the Nintendo Wii exists? You've probably never heard of Virtua Quest either, a beat-em-up for the GameCube and PS2 that takes place in the universe of Sega's very own Virtua Fighter. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not super familiar with Virtua Fighter at all. My only history with this series before playing Virtua Quest was playing Virtua Fighter 2 in Yakuza's Club Sega arcades. I stumbled across Virtua Quest while going down a rabbit hole about Sonic the Fighters and learning it was developed by Sega's AM2 division, who also happened to work on all the Virtua Fighter games. And somewhere along the line I saw they also made a little game called Virtua Quest as well. And hey, did you know Virtua Fighter is responsible for the creation of Shenmue? Originally, Sega had plans of making an RPG game for the Sega Saturn that would revolve around Akira Yuki, the protagonist of the Virtua Fighter series. It was given the working title Virtua Fighter RPG: Akira Story, but development eventually got pushed to the Sega Dreamcast, where they decided to drop the Virtua Fighter brand entirely and title the game Shenmue. You can still see inklings of Virtua Fighter in Shenmue, and the project did get a 2-volume manga that was based on the story of the cancelled RPG, but Sega fans still wondered what a proper Virtua Fighter RPG would look like, and in 2004, 5 years after the release of Shenmue, they would have their answer. Unfortunately, most of the reviews and conversations I read for this game weren't all that great, but while looking up gameplay of this game, I saw one of the game's very first cutscenes, and I knew I had to give this game a try. Let me just play a bit for you.
Nice work! Looks like you made it back, without a hitch. Without a hitch? Are you kidding? Give me a break! Do you know what I had to go through to get this? Save it for later. You got back okay. That's all that matters, right? Just let me see that data chip, okay?
This cutscene just hit a chord with me. The theatrical mocapped animations, this kid with a backwards cap and band-aid on his face that screams early 2000s anime character design. I loved it. This is gonna be an odd comparison, and I don't know if everyone's gonna get it, but it really reminded me of those anime that were created specifically to sell toys to children. I'm talking about your Beyblades, your Bakugans, your Pokemon, hell, even live action shows like Power Rangers a little bit. I know they're not the best, but I have a really soft spot for these shows, just for nostalgia alone. Fun fact, before I decided to make videos reviewing video games, I was gonna make a series entirely talking about all these anime and their merchandise, starting with Yu-Gi-Oh! I even bought a Yu-Gi-Oh! Dual Disc and a sweet copy of Shonen Jump featuring an interview with Kazuki Takahashi. I still might get around to that one day, but what I'm trying to say is if Virtua Quest was going to appeal to anyone at all, it would be me. So I guess we'll just have to see if it was deserving of all the criticism. We can go right into the story. The game takes place in the not so distant future where mankind has grown so bored of exploring Earth, they spend most of their time in the virtual reality world known as Nexus, which connects the entire world through different servers. Unfortunately, some of these servers have gone forgotten and neglected over time, but certain individuals known as treasure hunters still access these servers to collect bits of code known as data chips and sell them for money. That's where our main character Sei comes in. He lives on a man-made island city named Acropolis and wants to join an air bike race with his friend Hayami, but they can't afford to fix their bike, so Hayami convinces Sei to become a treasure hunter. This includes having to complete a test to become a licensed hunter. Along the way, he gets a little rabbit buddy named Bit who helps guide him through the Nexus. It's by your side the entire game, giving you tips and stuff. Think of Navi from Zelda. Sei also runs into a bunch of enemies. There are these flying enemies called Protectors, which attack intruders and dead servers. There are also these generic foot soldiers, which make up a majority of the bad guys you'll be fighting in the game. Some of them have guns, some of them are ninja themed. There's a bunch of larger enemies that come in different variants too. And if you're curious how Sei knows how to fight, he has a special tool called a hunter's glove on his arm that has martial arts programs installed on it. This particular glove was gifted to him by his distant father. Exploring the first server in the game, Sei meets a mysterious girl named Toka who warns him that it's too dangerous to be here and he should log out. But he finds himself blocked from doing so, and Toka tells him he'll have to fight the root user if he wants to escape. So Sei makes his way through the level and comes across this thing known as a virtual soul. Once you touch these, you're transported to another digital realm and get to fight characters from the Virtua Fighter series. Or I guess you're fighting their combat data. The explanation for why these Virtua Souls exist is that the fighters joined a tournament, but it turned out to be a trap designed by this secret organization to steal their fighting data and make a cyborg fighting machine known as a Dural that amalgamates all their abilities. The Dural actually exists in the real Virtua Fighter games too, as the last character you'll face in arcade mode. But just to reiterate everything so far, you log into the server, collect a bunch of data chips and Virtua Souls, beat the root user, and log out. That's pretty much the entire game flow, and it can get pretty repetitive. It's a shame too, because this game has a fairly diverse amount of settings with these different servers. There's a city server, there's a jungle server, there's a server that takes place in the Nexus's mainframe, there's even a Shenmue 2 server. That's probably the most forgettable one though, cause you skip like 80% of it chasing down an enemy that captured a bit. And when you are able to explore this server, you realize there isn't anything else to do in this level but run to the end. On the gameplay itself, Virtua Quest is a mix between a 3D platformer and a beat-em-up. Sei can run on walls and climb up or across ledges and use this digital wire whip thingy that connects to these hooks. Each colored hook has a different quirk as well. The orange ones swing you across gaps, the blue ones move back and forth between fixed points, green does the same but it doesn't start carrying you until the wire is attached, and pink swings you around the entire hook until you let go. I think the timing can take a little getting used to. Finding that sweet spot where you don't undershoot every release can be so annoying. Also, the way you bring out the wire is by moving the right analog stick in any direction, which means you have an almost complete lack of camera control. The only reliable way of getting the camera to look where you want it to is by pressing the left trigger to make it snap behind you. And honestly, that was good enough for me most of the time. But there were certain jumps I had to make at awkward angles, and just having the ability to turn the camera just a little bit instead of having to move to a better spot to make it snap behind me would have been really helpful. I didn't have any other problems with the game's controls though. I thought the combat was decent. You tap the A button to do a basic combo, and if you hit X you'll do a Virtual Soul technique which changes depending on whether you're running or walking or whatever else. If you manage to launch an enemy off the ground, you can extend your combos with Sei's wire. Flicking up on the C stick freezes the enemy and makes Sei dash towards them, allowing you to do air combos. Flicking down brings them back towards you, allowing you to infinite pretty much every enemy. You know, except for the bosses and Virtua Fighters, cause they can break out of mid-air combos at any time. I thought it was really satisfying pulling off these complex aerial combos and mixing it up with a wire flick, and then finishing it off with a soul technique. You can even do AoE attacks called synapse bombers where you become any one of the Virtua Fighters and explode everyone nearby. Underneath your health bar is a synapse point bar that drains whenever you use a Virtual Soul technique or press the right trigger to synapse break. In this mode you're impervious to all damage, and when you use special attacks enemies go into slow motion, allowing you to just lay into them. It also lets you spam special attacks as fast as you want, which is really helpful when fighting some of these tankier enemies, but that will drain your SP bar at light speed, so you have to pick and choose when you want to abuse it. You unlock a lot of new moves throughout the game. This is where those Virtua Fighters come into play. Once you beat them, they'll teach you a new Virtual Soul technique, which are all attacks from the series. And man, these cutscenes are so hazy for no reason, it kinda hurts my eyes to look at them. You can customize Sei's moveset at any time in the pause menu, and if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice stars next to the name of the technique that dictates the move's rarity. They're there for a reason too. You actually find most Virtua Souls in these colorful boxes which have either 1 or 2 stars on them, and can only be opened if you hit them with a technique that has an equal or greater amount of stars. Once I found which ones worked best for me though, I never switched them again. There was this one part in the game where you're exploring these ancient ruins and come across these tombs that can only be opened by using a technique of the person whose picture is on the door. But it's not fun going into the menu every 5 seconds to equip a different character's technique just to bust down some wall and find some enemies behind it. And you had to do it because some of these tombs had Virtua Souls and key items inside of them that you need to access later parts of the level. That was the only part of the game where I had to switch up my tried and true techniques, but like I said, I stuck with the aerial dropkick and shoulder bash for most of the game once I unlocked those. They dealt so much freaking damage, but that's probably because I built Sei like a glass cannon with these upgrades. After logging out of a server, you return to the Hunters Guild, which serves as the game's main hub. You can save your game in these little pods that give you a free heal, or you can go to this shop which lets you purchase all sorts of upgrade tools with data chips. You can buy extended combos, attacks that let you hurt downed enemies, health upgrades, attack and defense boosts, revives, and so on. You can't just equip all the upgrades and expect Sei to turn into a monster though. Your upgrades are represented by these blocks that come in all shapes and sorts, and you have to place them inside of this cube thing centering around a red block in the middle. If you position your upgrades correctly, you can fit a lot of them in here, but it might take a bit for you to get everything in the right spot. You can fill out the entire cube if you know what you're doing though. It reminded me of the inventory management from Diablo and RE4. Just, in 3D. I gave my Sei tons of attack and SP upgrades, but if you wanted him to be more of a tank, you could upgrade him to have a lot of health and defense. And since I'm already talking about the shop, let's talk a little bit more about the guild. Every treasure hunter starts at the rank of low A, but above that there's high A and XA. At the start of the game, Hayami is already at the rank of XA, but Sei being new to treasure hunting starts at low A. That means he can only walk around the low A guild, but you'll quickly level as you progress through all the servers, and once you're high enough, you can take other skill tests to make high A and eventually XA. Not much really changes in the high A and XA guilds though. The shops have better upgrades and Sei can speak to different hunters in each guild, but that's about it. I actually like talking to these guys a lot though. You get a little more story about the real world outside of Nexus, and you even learn that most other hunters just believe Virtua Souls are rumors. Sometimes these other hunters will even have side quests for you, which unfortunately only amount to defeating some enemies or finding these MacGuffins in a very lenient time limit, but at least the game is trying to do something different with these. The quickest way to level up is to revisit servers you've already beaten instead of tackling new ones, because you don't have to sit through any of the cutscenes or other story beats anymore. There's actually a couple reasons you'll want to replay stages anyway, one of them having to do with our itty bitty buddy Bit. In each server, you'll come across this digital food that you can feed to Bit, and depending on how much of a specific type of food you feed it, they'll digivolve into a different animal. Each animal has a unique ability which helps Sei. For example, the frog bit protects you from fall damage, and the dog bit supposedly collects data chips for you, but I don't think I ever saw it pick any of them up. Most bits are actually offensive partners like Jellyfish Bit, but I don't really find those ones helpful because Bit decides when it wants to attack on its own, and it doesn't seem to attack very often. The unfortunate thing about switching forms with Bit is that you'll have to feed it food each time you want a different animal. As soon as you unlock new forms for Bit, you should be able to just switch back and forth between them in the menu like you can with Virtua Soul techniques. But just like I stuck with a few special moves when I unlocked those, I just stuck with Dolphin Bit when I got that one because it healed Sei pretty often. The other reason you're gonna have to replay these servers is to collect all the hunter badges. Each server has a 3-star box hidden somewhere inside it, and inside these 3-star boxes are the badges. But because 3-star techniques are pretty late game, you'll have to return to each of these servers eventually. Sometimes these boxes are hidden in plain sight, and other times they're hidden behind a puzzle. Man, I really did not care for this one in the very first server. It's right behind you at the start of the stage, but the jump you have to make up onto the balcony it's resting on from this narrow ledge is so tight I thought I was doing something wrong at first. But no, it's just a tough jump. And once you collect all 7 badges, you can complete one more very unforgiving test to unlock the unique rank Ole. I guess that stands for Ultra or Ultimate. You also get to fight the guy who gives you every test for the fun of it, I suppose. You don't unlock anything for beating him, and you don't really really get anything else from collecting all of these badges, so I don't think it's worth collecting them. But I mean, it does take like 5 minutes tops to run through a stage and collect these badges. So I don't know, if you play this game and want just a little bit more from it, you can do this, I guess. I recommend collecting all the lost data of the Virtua Fighters. I've already talked about how much I love it when a game has stuff like concept art and lets you view 3D models of the characters multiple times on this channel, and collecting models of the characters is actually part of the gameplay here. If you defeat bad guys with the Synapse Bomber attack, there's a chance they'll drop an item called Lost Data, and each character has 3 Lost Data versions for you to collect. They're really just models you can look at, but if you manage to collect all 3 types of lost data for a character and bring it to this guy named Dot in the High A Guild, he'll let you rematch that Virtua Fighter at any time you want to from the mission select screen. This is a way better late game reward to me. Now that I think about it, I suppose this can encourage you to change up your moveset too, since the game decides the character that'll come out in your Synapse Bomber attack by tracking how much you've used that character's techniques in the previous server. And Lost Data doesn't drop random characters' data, it drops data of the character using the attack. So if you want to collect all that lost data, you gotta use all those techniques. I guess you can also replay levels if you want to rematch the root users. Besides the cutscenes, these guys were probably my favorite part of the game, honestly. They also reminded me of those cheesy anime I mentioned earlier. They all have gimmicks to them, and that made them feel very Monster of the Weekish to me, you know? There's this trio of little gremlin dudes that reminded me of the Paradox Brothers from Yu-Gi-Oh! There's a ninja boss whose entire shtick is he's a ninja, and there's a masked snow woman who uses magic. I actually wasn't a big fan of her boss fight though. She's one of the only bosses in the game with 2 phases, and she does this incantation move where you can't attack her until she finishes. It's not difficult, just wait her out and attack her when she's free. You just gotta be patient. There's a couple other bosses I wasn't big on either, but you know what? I would be spoiling the game if I talked about them. So, spoiler warning, if you don't want to hear the game's entire story, you can skip to the time that's currently on screen. You should know it gets pretty stupid. So let's pick up just around where we left off earlier. While exploring the first server to find the root users, Sei comes across this nerd named Raud who explains what Virtua Souls are and says the bad guys we're fighting want to use Nexus to plunge the world into chaos, meaning Sei and Hayami are getting into more than they bargained for. Remember, they just wanted to make enough money to fix up their air bike, but Sei is thrown right into the middle of this conflict cause he's the only hunter that can harness the power of Virtua Souls thanks to that special glove his father gave him. So Sei beats the root user in the first server. He makes his way to another server to collect more Virtua Souls. He observes another hunter who he suspects is also looking for Virtua Souls to easily put down a bunch of bad guys, and he eventually makes his way to a server where he hears hunters are being kidnapped. It's in this server Sei meets Toka again, and she explains the root users are all members of an evil organization named Judgment 6. But before she can finish telling Sei what their intentions are, she finds herself short of breath and runs off. I didn't find this out until completing this game, but it turns out this Judgment 6 group is already part of Virtua Fighter canon. They're the main antagonistic force who created the Doral you fight at the end of Virtua Fighter games. I mentioned them earlier, but didn't name them. But yeah, you beat the root user of that server who was kidnapping hunters, you find Hayami in a game of hide and seek for another Virtua Soul, you save him from another root user who was kidnapping hunters, you see that mysterious hunter from before back in the Hunters Guild, you follow him to the next server he's visiting, and Sei meets him face to face for the first time. His name is Shot, and he says he's looking for information, not Virtua Souls, but he'll give you the one he came across if you help him defeat the root user. Toka also happens to join your conversation, but Shot gets really mad at her for some reason. It seems like they have some history. Toka runs away from the both of you all sad, but Sei and Shot eventually make their way to where the root user is located, and just before the two of you fight it, Shot decides to explain his history with Toka. It turns out he was an investigator who looked into crimes that took place in Nexus, and while he and his partner were looking into Judgment 6, they made contact with a member of the organization who promised to give them evidence to bring Judgment 6 down. That person was Toka, and Shot's partner was Raud. At the last moment, Toka betrayed the both of them, which led to Judgment 6 killing Raud in the real world. But if Raud's dead, how did we see him earlier? Then the leader of Judgment 6, Moon, finally appears with a gang of his baddies, and Shot holds them off while telling Sei to go fight the root user to escape. Some great voice acting here, by the way.
I don't care what happens.
Sei defeats the root user and returns to the guild, but now he's all sad because he learned his friend Toka is working with Judgment 6. But he eventually regains his will to fight them after being convinced to visit another server to rescue some more kidnapped hunters. And the game starts its final act when Hayami gives Sei the address of a server with funny activity. So you make your way through this server and fight this mini-boss who kidnapped Bit. I was pretty annoyed by this fight at first cause you're only able to get in one combo whether it's on the ground or mid-air, but not in between for some reason, and it has a lot of little buddies who fly around getting in your way. And then I remembered Synapse Break exists. This thing is a godsend. But after you beat it and it flies off, Bit tells Sei it was probably a former Bit like itself that was corrupted. That's not the last corrupted enemy we see either. Further in the level, Sei sees Moon talking down to a remorseful Toka who vows to fight against Judgment 6, which makes Sei forgive her and come to her aid. But she's immediately kidnapped by Judgment 6 and a corrupted Shot attacks Sei. Then there's a boss fight against Shot. It's a comparatively decent boss fight to the last one. This one seemed intimidating at first because Shot zooms all over the battlefield, but this fight is just as easy as the others if you know what you're doing. Wait his attacks out and abuse your Synapse Break when you can. You'll get him eventually. After beating Shot, he reverts back to his original self and reveals Judgment 6's shitty plan is to kidnap and corrupt treasure hunters like they did to him. They plan on using a bunch of hunters to infiltrate Acropolis's main Nexus server and plunge their country into chaos, allowing them to take over the world. It's something about sinking the island and throwing the world into chaos, it doesn't matter. So Shot is forcibly logged out of Nexus, which normally you would be fine with, but since Judgment 6 wiped his backup data, he dies in the real world. That's how they killed Raud too. And Sei makes his way to the Acropolis server to fight Judgment 6 one last time. Save before this final server too, man. When you first enter this server, there's a bunch of enemies you'll have to fight, and then a boss rush against 3 of the root users you fought before. And you're probably gonna die here a few times. After that, there's another wave of enemies for you to fight, and if the boss rush didn't get you, you're probably gonna die here too because of how many they throw at you. It's only after all that the game finally throws a save spot heal your way, and we have our final boss fights. By the way, did you catch that? There's a subtle reveal at the end here where it turns out these generic enemies are actually treasure hunters. Remember, Judgment 6 were kidnapping a bunch of treasure hunters to make an assault on this server, and they're here, but who are the only enemies we fight besides the bosses? I like that little detail a lot. But anyways, you make your way to Moon and Toka, who is revealed to have been a Doral the entire game. Judgment 6 made her evil just like they brainwashed everyone else, but she was holding her evil Doral side back the entire game. We have a pretty cool fight against her too. She has the techniques of the Virtua Fighters, and there is one emotional moment in the middle of the fight that actually landed for me. The fight pauses and Toka regains control of herself to tell Sei she'll hold her power back as best as she can so Sei can put her out of her misery, which he does, and Toka dies. Or, I mean, she's forcibly logged out. Poor kid. But now it's time. Sei confronts Moon again, who's unmasked himself and is in the middle of destroying Acropolis. There's a really underwhelming boss fight against this guy. I found him way easier than the Doral we just fought. It's the same as most other bosses. Evade his attacks, Synapse Break when you can, repeat. He does have a second phase where he turns into that, and he can go giant form, but you're not gonna have any trouble here either. Dodge his attacks when you can, and use your wire to launch off of these hooks and hit him when he's midair. Yeah, that fight did not last long at all. Moon is forcibly logged out, and I'm not sure if he actually dies. He says we'll meet again to Sei, but I don't know if he's talking about the afterlife, or maybe they were propping up a sequel or something, or what, but whatever. Sei tries his best to undo whatever Moon did to stop Acropolis from exploding, but he can't make heads or tails of all this technobabble. But there is someone who can. Raud comes back and saves the day, but it's not actually Raud, it's Sei's father. While he's undoing Moon's work, he explains he used to work for Judgment 6 and was the one who developed the Virtua Souls, but when he learned they were going to be used for evil, he turned to Raud and Shot to help them stop Judgment 6 and guarantee both his and Toka's safety. Unfortunately, Toka was already too far gone as a Doral, and her evil side betrayed everyone to Judgment 6. The entire game, Sei's father was just posing as Raud, which I guess is something you can do in the Nexus. He also says that the special hunter glove that allows Sei to use Virtua Souls previously belonged to Judgment 6, but he stole it and gave it to Sei, effectively making him the world's last hope. After that, Sei's father uses Master Code to lock Sei out of Nexus while he stays behind to stop Acropolis from exploding. And the game cuts to a scene of Sei wearing his VR headset in the real world, which really puts this story into perspective. Hayami, who was also outside of Nexus by this point, had observed the entire final fight from outside the Nexus and explained Sei's father saved Acropolis, but he's gone missing. And the game ends with Sei going back into the Nexus after vowing to find his father. There's also one final scene where it's revealed Toka's still alive in the real world. Credits roll, and that's Virtua Quest. It's not the best story in the world, but I'm not holding it to some high standard. We knew what we were getting into from the very start with this game. I mean, how many stories are there already of some teenage boy getting some power or gizmo and it turns out he's the chosen one? I don't think this story was written to be some high art either, just something to keep the children it was created for entertained. Like, some of the ways this game gets the player to go from one new area to the next are super contrived. A game of hide and seek? Seriously? This story left me with a lot of questions. I think the rules of the Nexus are ill-defined. First of all, how does the Nexus work? I get that it's virtual reality, and I figure it's more than just something you see because Sei has abilities connected to his synapses, but if that's the case, how is Hayami in here? There's only one machine in Sei's bedroom, and we only ever see him using a normal laptop. Maybe he runs off somewhere and connects to a machine while we're also in Nexus, but they never explain that. And maybe somehow you can access the Nexus through a computer, but what if he was forcibly logged out without backup data? My guess is nothing would happen to him since he isn't physically connected to a machine, but if that were true, wouldn't it make more sense for everyone to use the Nexus this way? Also, what the hell is backup data, and how could not having any kill you in the real world? They never explain any of this. You know what? This game really feels like Kingdom Hearts Light. Both in the way this game forces you to take a just go with it bro, don't question anything or else you're gonna hamper your experience attitude, and the stark contrast of happy-go-lucky and edgelord characters. Moon in particular I think could fit in as a member of Organization 13 or something, and I'm not just talking about his appearance. I enjoyed him, but he's really not intimidating for someone who's supposed to be the final boss, you know? He takes himself so seriously, always talking slowly for dramatic effect and using silly lines that aren't threatening at all. I mean, dude, you're fighting children here. I think it's the fact that a majority of this game also takes place in the virtual world that I never saw him as a real threat, even when he was about to destroy Acropolis. Maybe it's because we never actually spent any time on Acropolis, I didn't feel the world-ending stakes at the end of the game. I think my only other real problem with this story is the ending. The twist was pretty predictable. You can tell there's some connection between Raud and Sei's father long before the ending. But more than that, I thought it would have made more sense for Sei and Hayami to look for Sei's father in the real world first, and if they had no luck there, then they should have gone searching for him in the Nexus. It's ambiguous whether or not he died at the end of the game, but I mean if he did, they'd never find him, and if he didn't die, they could still force him to log out in the real world. That's something Hayami mentions being able to do in fact. I figure it's possible he's had his backup data destroyed by Judgment 6 just like Shot and Raud, so he'd die if he was forcibly logged out too, but they never explain that either. I promise I'm done though. I'm not trying to do some deep analysis of Virtua Quest. I was chilling while playing this game, man. I beat it over the weekend, I had this game on one monitor, I had some movies on another, and I enjoyed the dumb fun. But that's all my thoughts on the story. I'm sorry to say it, but I don't think Virtua Quest is worth your time. It's not a terrible game, but I'd only recommend it to Virtua Fighter fans, who are probably the only people who already know this game exists, and to people who are not only able to tolerate games where you can turn your brain off to get lost in a world where new rules can be made up at any point to do anything the story desires, but thrive off of it. I'm sorry to keep calling out Kingdom Hearts fans, but I'm looking at you guys. As fun as things like combat or collecting the models can be, I don't think they're interesting enough to say you should give this hidden gem a chance, nor anything else in this game for that matter. All of the stages are boring, and the game's not very challenging outside of 1 or 2 segments. The most enjoyment I got out of Virtua Quest was meeting the new bosses and watching these cutscenes. That's what drew me in. But as much as I love the mid-2000s humor and aesthetic, that can only take you so far. We gotta look at the game as a whole here, and unfortunately, it's a pretty mediocre one. I feel like I'm repeating myself here though, so I'm just gonna close this video out with maybe it would have fared better as a show on 4Kids. Hey everyone, it's Cosmo. I'm sorry this video took a while to come out. I originally planned on making a video about Super Monkey Ball Adventure, but no. And I lost all the footage of the other game I wanted to put out after that one, so I'll have to replay that. That'll be out after Kiwami 2, but anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.